Okay, cool. All right, recording has started. Thank you everyone for being here today. This is our October meeting. Disregard that where it says September meeting. So September was Deaf Awareness Month, and to recognize that, today we have the honor of having some very special guest speakers with us today. They're going to speak a little bit, share their stories. And before that, though, we're going to just do a quick little officer introduction, because I realized that last time we might not have gotten everyone in that in the Zoom meeting here or in person. So just to make sure everyone knows who we are, we're going to do a little bit of our introductions real quick. This is our agenda for today. So we're going to get to know everyone. Again, I know it says GAIN, but that was a typo. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Deaf Awareness Month. And then we're going to have some deaf speakers or some guest speakers talk about their stories. And then we're going to just have a quick little member poll, because I realize we might not have gotten everyone with that last poll. So we'll try and get everyone with this one. And then we'll close out. So really quickly, my name is Ryan Brenner. I am the president here at Delta Alpha Pi. And my role is just to be almost like a leader position, but really just guiding us in a direction. But it wouldn't be anything without our officers. So I will hand it over first to Sarah, who is our vice president, and she will introduce herself.
Yes, right here. You ready?
Okay. Am I getting it?
You can, or you can sit. It's up to you. You better speak into the phone.
Okay.
You want to sign, or you want to speak?
You can hold it. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Isoria, and I'm the vice president.
Hi there, my name's Aiden Wood. I'm the social media manager, so you'll see me on Instagram, like managing the posts and stuff, and creating flyers and things like that.
Hey, hello, everybody. My name is Caleb Loera. I'm your treasurer, and what I do is that I organize fundraisers and events that we do, and also collect the I manage the money and so forth that we collect from the fundraisers. So that's what I do.
So hi everyone attending in person and online. My name is Christelle Martinez. I am the secretary, and I am in charge of keeping notes of everything that goes on in the club.
Cool. And thank you to our officers for being able to introduce themselves. I hope we get to know all of you guys, and I hope you all get to know us over the coming weeks and months. And hopefully we form those connections that will last a lifetime. So we're going to go ahead and get on with our presentation. So in honor of Deaf Awareness Month, which was in September, I'm just going to talk a little bit about it, just because not everyone is aware of the challenges that deaf people face every day. So really quickly, according to the World Health Organization, there are approximately 466 million people worldwide that live with disabling hear loss. And in the United States alone, there are approximately 15% of adults, that's about 37.5 million, report some trouble hearing. And then about 2 to 3 out of every 1,000 children in the United States are born with a detectable level of hearing loss in one or both ears. And then there are over 300 different sign languages around the world. American Sign Language is a complete language that employs hand movements as well as facial expressions and body positions. And deaf culture is actually a rich cultural heritage with its own art, literature, social norms, and shared history. And deaf culture does not see differences in disability, but rather it sees it as a difference in human experience, which I think is very powerful. So deaf individuals often face communication challenges, like especially in situations where sign language interpreters or captioning services are absent or not even available at all. And really, it's the lack of awareness about communication needs that can lead to social isolation of these people. And deaf children may face educational disparities, including limited access to quality education and other support services that are needed. And inclusive education and early intervention programs are crucial for their development. Right. So there's a couple of organizations that are worldwide that conduct various awareness campaigns to promote deaf culture, sign language, and most importantly, inclusivity and acceptance. There's also platforms like social media that are really great for playing like a very, very significant role in spreading awareness. And we also have laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act in the United States that ensure equal rights and opportunities for people with disabilities, including those who are deaf or hard of hearing. And like I said earlier, all this information is available to you guys. So if you wanted to learn more, if you really just wanted to enrich yourself and just educate yourself, we have some links here where I got all this information for this PowerPoint today. So the first one we have is the National Association for the Deaf, and you can either go to the link at the very bottom there, or you can scan that QR code with your phone, and it should take you right to that website. And then we have another one for the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders. This one is more of research-driven and gives a lot of very, very helpful information in terms of deaf awareness as well. And with that, I think we will go on to our guest speakers. So I'm going to hand it over to our Vice President, who will introduce her friends to us.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to introduce our wonderful, wonderful guest speaker today. I would like all of you guys to give applause for thanking them for coming here. Yay. Okay, first guest speaker will be coming up. Her name is Sarah Deline.
Moving seats around a little bit to make sure that everyone can see. Am I going to run the PowerPoint on my own? Or do you want me to? Well, I can. It's okay. It'd be easier if I can control it. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Sheline. It's pronounced like Sheline, and this is my name sign. It's nice to meet everyone. So today I am going to share my story, my journey through college, my upbringing, and also I'm going to talk about my family. It's rare that I share very much about my family because it is an intimate story, but I think it's important that you know about how my family supported me through college and through my childhood. So I'm going to start there. Well, growing up, I always knew that I wanted to go to college. It was always my goal. I always had that in mind. And knowing that I'm a deaf person, I still always had in mind that I was going to go to college. I'm the only deaf person in my family, no other deaf members. And I'm also a twin. So growing up, my mom, and currently my mom has always been my biggest supporter. Well, both my parents actually, but my mom is just my heart. She has always encouraged me. She always told me that you can do anything that you want to do. She always told me that you can do anything that your twin sister can do. So keep that in the back of your mind. Can you go back one? So a little bit about my upbringing. I was mainstreamed during my K through 12, and I was mainstreamed in oral education. So I didn't learn sign language until I was 18, later in life. So that means that prior to that time, I didn't know any sign language growing up, and that was a challenge, often frustrating for me. When I did learn ASL finally at age 18, it was a really powerful experience for me because, like I said, growing up, I just lived with a lot of misunderstandings, and that in and of itself was very stressful for me. So finally, when I got into the deaf community and started learning ASL, I remember commenting to my mom, telling my mom, actually just recently, that that was a turning point for me. It was a huge change in my life. And that was between the years of 18 and 19 years old. I remember my first really frustrating experience hanging around with deaf people and not understanding what was going on. Also in that environment, missing things. So I got home and talked to my mom, sat down with her at the table, just wanted to catch up with her. And I started crying, just bawling my eyes out because I told my mom, I need help. So we did some research online and we found a community agency called Tri-County GLAD, which is based in Ventura. They're a resource center. And my mom and I went in to Tri-County GLAD. We started talking with the director. Plus, we met their community advocates and really got to know what they did. But it made a huge impact on me. And when my mom and I left that day, after meeting the staff and the director, they informed me that it might be a good idea if I consider transferring to Cal State Northridge, which is fairly near here. So I did. I took that leap. I transferred over to CSUN, got in, and it changed my life. I learned ASL. I developed my actual identity. I met deaf and hard of hearing people that were like me. Growing up, I'd never really met another deaf person. I was mainstreamed K through 12, so it was a completely hearing environment. And it was difficult and frustrating at times. So Tri-County GLAD is the organization for me that actually changed my life. So I wanted to talk about my education. I have a bachelor's degree in deaf studies with an emphasis in human services, and that's from CSUN. And then I went on to get my master's degree in rehab counseling. And that was an emphasis on deafness. Now I picked those two universities because they were deaf friendly and they had really strong basis in services that I needed on both of those campuses, which was very important for me. As a college student, I wanted communication to be accessible and easy for me for the first time. So when I went to both of those universities, both of those campuses are designed for deaf and hard of hearing students. Yes, they're mainstream campuses. They have hearing students, but they have quality services for deaf and hard of hearing students. And those foundations are already in place. So when Sarah asked me to be a presenter today for your organization, kind of had to do some self-analysis or thinking about what I wanted to share with you and what might make the biggest impact. And I identified 5 of my top 5 things that help me navigate through college in a successful manner. The first was open communication. And that for me is important in that I tell people that I am deaf and that I need particular accommodations. And open communication is also important because in general, people, they don't know much about the deaf community or deaf people as individuals. So it's my job to tell them how best to accommodate me, how best to communicate with me. So open communication for me means identifying my needs. I also started advocating for myself. I started telling people the things that I needed. For classes, I needed interpreters. I needed note takers. And it was also important for me to have quality accommodations on campus, meaning qualified, certified interpreters. That's of prime importance. It's important that interpreters be able to understand what I'm trying to say and that I can best represent myself in that way. It was also important to be able to balance social and academic pursuits in an equal manner. That was hugely important for me to be able to be on campus where I was going to study, going to classes, and then when I left, I still had some time to hang out with friends and be social, which gave me that balance that I was looking for, and that was key. And I identified qualities that I had as a student, and the top one of which is perseverance. Perseverance is key. Never giving up, always keep going, and that's a motto that I held to. So you might be wondering what I do for a living now. Well, for the last 11 years, I've been a rehab counselor for deaf and hard of hearing consumers. I work for the Department of Rehabilitation in California. So I encourage deaf and hard of hearing, deaf-blind consumers to go get out there and get working, get the kind of supports they need, get training, get further education. And it's been a great career. It's been the perfect fit for me, and I've loved it. I found it a way to really give back and support my community. Ironically enough, yesterday was my last day in that position. Remember the organization that I mentioned that changed my life? Well, now I am joining the team at TC Glad. I start in 2 weeks. Thank you. So my education paid off. It helped. My education led me to further opportunities, for sure. Some of the things that I wanted to touch on regarding Deaf Awareness Month. I'll just share some statistics with you. I know they covered some of this at the start of this presentation, but here are some more statistics. In the US, there are about 11 million deaf and hard of hearing people all over the US. The deaf-blind population in the US encompasses 70 to 100,000 people. So that's the deaf-blind community in the United States. ASL is the third most commonly used language in the US. And the last thing is more cultural sensitive training for you. Oftentimes people love to label us hearing impaired. And when we see that word impaired, it indicates a problem. So, communities at large think that that's the appropriate PC term, but we prefer the terms deaf and hard of hearing, and that's fine. So keep that in the back of your mind. And I just wanted to follow up and tell you, follow your dreams. Never give up. Keep going, no matter what. Any questions? Joel has a question. I'm wondering, when you started interacting with the deaf community at age 18, you started learning sign language. Did you ever feel, for one, how did you identify? And also, did you ever feel like you had to role shift, as we call it? Like you grew up in oral education. Did you ever feel like you had to transition between those two worlds? Today, I identify as deaf. I am a deaf person. I am culturally deaf. I use sign language. But when I was growing up, I identified as hard of hearing. And hard of hearing to me personally is when someone says you're hard of hearing. I mean, what does that mean? What does it mean to anyone? It means you can't hear, or you can hear a little bit. It could identify at what level you understand as well. So hard of hearing is more of a medical term, if you will. So if you're looking at a graph of hearing loss, hard of hearing people have a more mild hearing loss. So yeah, I did have to kind of balance between two worlds as I was entering the deaf community. And I had to figure out who I was, both at home, you know, because when I got home, my family saw me as they always had. They didn't sign. So I had to be with them in the way that they knew me. So when I'd get home to visit with my family, I had to be one way, but then I'd go back and hang out with my friends and work and be in and around the deaf community, and that was different. But still, I felt like it was a balancing act for me. And it was tough. It's tough to be me. But yes, now, since I've learned ASL, I absolutely love it. I love communicating this way. I love the community, and it is a piece of my heart. That was a great question, Joel. Another question, Jody?
I know when I ASL or sign language. Do you know other sign language languages? Sign language, there's Australian Sign language. Have you had to deal with that when you worked at DOR?
That's a good question. Because I have 10 years of experience in working with this community, and I did used to work in downtown Los Angeles. So there have been many people that I worked with that moved to the US. So they're not from here, and they didn't know ASL upon arriving. As you know, ASL isn't a universal language. Every country has its own sign language. But here in Ventura County, we have a large population of deaf consumers and deaf part of our population that knows MSL or LSM, which is a sign language from Mexico. Yes, so when I was working for DOR, I did have to learn to communicate and to figure out how to communicate with people that weren't using ASL. So several of my consumers were in that boat. But it was a great experience. It's a great community. But like I said, now I'm moving on to a new organization, a nonprofit, TC GLAD. So I'm really happy about that. Other questions? That's a great question. We have one system, which is called International Sign Language. It's for international conferences and large international events where many people from other countries are coming together and use different sign language. It's also called Gestuno, Ginny's saying. So we can communicate that way. People can understand each other when they come to an international conference, potentially.
Okay, so
Any other questions for Sarah? Last chance. 3, 2, 1. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Joel.
No power.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, all right, the next guest speaker we have today is Joel Garcia. He'll be coming up.
Thank you, Sarah. Can everyone see me okay? Everyone see me online? Great. Thank you, Sarah, for introducing me. And Sarah, thank you for your presentation. It's really powerful and really important information for this audience to be aware of. I wanted to also thank Sarah, your Vice President, for inviting us here. It's certainly an honor to come and present and talk to you all. My name is Joel Garcia. I'm deaf, Latino, Chicano, and I grew up in the barrio in Oxnard my whole life. What I wanted to tell you about my journey in growing up in Oxnard and after in my adulthood, what I've done. My family is Mexican and came from Mexico. They experienced challenges with education, opportunities, work, and because of that, they moved to the U.S. to gain some freedom. So I am the first generation that's born here in the U.S. I'm deaf, and there are two stories about my deafness. My family's, and then there is also the audiological story, if you will. My mom tells the story that when I was born, I was hearing. And at about 2 years old, my mom was looking after us, myself and my cousins. She was taking care of all of us. And on the second floor of the house, or we were on the second floor of the house, my cousin was there and got sick, started to get sick, was vomiting. So my mom took him to the bathroom and started cleaning him up. And you know how kids are at 1 or 2, they're very curious and can quickly get into trouble. So my cousin and I went to the door, which wasn't closed entirely. And we opened the door up and went out. And I ended up falling from the first floor to the second floor. I'm sorry, from the second floor to the first floor. And I got knocked in the head. And my mom came out but didn't know what had happened and was wondering where I was, and then heard me crying. And my cousin also indicated that I had fallen downstairs. So I got taken to the hospital in Ventura. The doctors checked me out and sent me home. A couple of days later, my mom started to notice that my behavior was odd. I was behaving differently than I had before the fall. I was very quiet, which wasn't normal for me. My mom decided to try testing me out, and she went over the door and slammed it, started making noises, things that I had normally responded to. And I was still somewhat responding to them, but they decided to take me to the hospital to get tested and found that I had lost my hearing. So we went to an audiologist, and we had I have had the same audiologist for a long time. Now, remember that an audiologist adheres to a medical model of deafness. And within reason, I mean, you can understand why. But their theories and their justifications are from that medical background. Their feeling was that I had been deaf from birth. So there are two conflicting stories, my mom's and my family's story about how I became deaf, and the audiologist's story that very much disagrees that I became deaf at 2. They think that I was born fully deaf, which is really interesting. When I did fall, I hit the left side of my head, kind of on top. If you hit that part of your head, there is a nerve running down that side of your head, just where I'm pointing to, right down to the back of your ear. And that's where I am deaf. On my right ear, or if the fall was if the deafness was because of the fall, I should be just deaf on that side and hearing on the right side. Or if I got hit in the back of the head, potentially that could deafen both ears. And that was the way the doctor saw it, and their evidence that I have been deaf since birth. So it's not necessarily here or there, but that happened when I was 2. Later, when I was at Gallaudet, they actually were doing DNA testing for genetics of deafness. So I decided to take the test. I thought, why not? I'm curious. And the team that was doing the DNA tests were deaf, or they were signers. And so they drew my blood. They took it to the lab and did what they do. But when they had the results, they called me in to sit me down and talk to me about the results. And I was really curious. So I sat down with them, and they said, well, you know, your case is really unique and rare, not common at all. In terms of genetics, the chromosomes, or, you know, I don't know all of it behind that, but my deafness, they said, what is genetic? So that means that somewhere in the line, there is genetics for deafness. But that it also showed that my deafness could have been caused by something like a high fever as well. Mine didn't exactly match either of those. So it was neither genetic nor, you know, illness. They couldn't exactly identify what it was. My whole point is that I'm proud of being deaf, no matter how that happened. I don't consider it some kind of mistake or tragedy or anything. I'm deaf, and I'm proud of that, and I've enjoyed my journey. Like I said, I was deaf from a very early age. I grew up here in Oxnard. I went to elementary school, or my K through 12 journey was in mainstream settings. with the deaf program. At that time, the student population of deaf students was pretty big. It was like 25 kids. Now it's pretty small, but at that time it was quite large. We had 2 sort of self-contained classrooms with teachers that signed. They signed typically in what we call C, which is Signing Exact English, which is different than ASL. C is a manual form that follows English word order and endings. So it'll use endings like ing, ed, like English does, which isn't normal for ASL. So if you're using C, you would sign I like this with an I on the chest, or going like this. And you would say, I am going to the store. Whereas in ASL, it's not the same word order or grammar, completely different. For example, the word to does not exist in ASL. The word the doesn't exist in ASL. So following that exact English word order was a way used to teach deaf children. And it taught that the concepts that this is the way English language is structured, but it also gave you the concept of, hey, a store. And you would know the sign for a store. And you could, in both languages, ASL and C, could say, hey, I'm going to the store. But it's in C, it's a lot more onerous. It's, repeating every single word, whereas in ASL, it's a lot more conceptual, if you will. Does that make sense? So that C is what I grew up with. I learned ASL later on in life. So like I said, K through 12, I was in a setting that used C, and I was getting speech training as well. In speech training, it was difficult for me to learn how to pronounce particular sounds. For example, the letter A. You grow up speaking and knowing how to pronounce these words, but deaf people, it requires time for us to acquire that type of ability to speak and to pronounce things correctly. I always struggled with the letter A and did so for months at a time. Just practice that, just trying to get it right. With the speech therapist teachers, or the speech therapist hand on my neck, or mine on their neck, trying to feel what the sound sounded like. And it was a lot of work, but it caused me to get behind in other subjects. Plus, at the same time, my family only spoke English. My family only spoke Spanish. I was raised by a single mother. My father was always at work. My mom was working days and at nights going to Oxnard College. She was taking English classes in order to learn to speak, read, and write English, and taking ASL. That time, there was a lot of discrimination that she experienced. And as a family, we didn't have a lot of support. That is better today for both my mother's community and mine. There's a lot more language communication, or access, I should say. But back in the 80s, that wasn't the case. So just understand that it was a different time. So my mom struggled with acquiring English and ASL. So I grew up getting in trouble, getting into gangs, starting at 9 years old. I got in my share of trouble, and I went through some pretty horrific things, but I've survived. I've seen people, my friends, have died in that setting. Some have gone to prison. I have a friend that's in prison for life. And it made me realize as I've gotten older, even though, I was in trouble early on, I found the value in education. And I realized at that time, I didn't have any self-pride. I didn't have an identity. I didn't have anything to look forward to or anyone to look up to, except gang life seemed like a normal thing that a kid in Oxnard, a poor kid in Oxnard did. So, at that time, I was like, I assumed I was going to go to prison at some point or die at a young age, probably 13, 14 years old. I didn't think past that at that time. Luckily, I made it past that. And in high school, I graduated from high school and then went to Oxnard College, where this was my first time. I'm the first one to get an education in my family. My family are farm workers largely and have missed out on education. So I'm not only the first generation born in the US, but the first one educated too. So I really struggled with reading and writing English. My English at that time, even college, looked like I was in elementary school. I didn't get access to enough education with English. But I was working with an interpreter at that time. Her name was Judy. She took it upon herself to teach me about English, gave me a strong foundation that I could build on. So after I started working with her, I really improved in terms of my English knowledge. And that helped me in college. I transferred to Gallaudet University, which is in Washington, D.C. The campus of Gallaudet is right near the Capitol building, probably 15, 20 minutes away. And I chose Gallaudet because it's a fully signing environment. People from around the world come to Gallaudet because they want to be there using American Sign Language and have that identity and that pride that people experience. And I gained that there. Before that, I didn't have that. We consider two different minds or states of being in our community. One is deaf and the other is hearing. And we see hearing as sort of a controlling factor. Hearing people in our experience have considered themselves above us because they have access to sound and speech. And so we use a particular sign for that type of community, those type of people. Whereas as a deaf person on Gallaudet campus, I had resources. I finally had equal footing with everybody else there, which really improved my life and helped me become a success. Unfortunately, at that time, there was no Latino club, Black Deaf Club, African American Club, Deaf Blind, Deaf Disabled, Muslim, queer. Any international students were there as well. There were late deafened students. A whole variety of people that I could associate with, socialize with. But it was really great to see that level of diversity too. And all of these people had overcome discrimination and challenges. I can't tell you the number of presentations I saw that told me about people's journeys and how they improved their lives. And these people were from all over the world. So once I graduated from Gallaudet, I had my bachelor's degree in social work and deaf studies as well. And then when I started my master's degree, I started writing about the deaf Chicano experience. I had read about, and people have done research on the language of Black deaf adults in that community because they have experienced language deprivation and cultural oppression. And so after reading that type of research, I thought, well, there are many Chicano deaf that have a similar experience. You know, we have in our community, we have CDIs, which are certified deaf interpreters, and they are often employed for people that either have come from another country and they're using another sign language like LSM. For example, in ASL, it's a very similar thing to a person coming from another country and not speaking English. So they might have broken English, they might have a limited ability to speak English as they just have arrived. But so in ASL, we might sign something like, how are you? Whereas in LSM, we sign this, ¿cómo estás? So that sign looks like C and E in a arc shape, and that means ¿cómo estás? In Oxnard, growing up in the barrio, you know, the stores, the restaurants, the street tacos, the clothes, things were somewhat affordable. And the culture was Chicano, Latino. That was where I grew up. And it didn't really matter if a person was deaf or hearing. You could get by with gesturing, even if you didn't speak the language. So this means taco. And that was easy to order what you needed. If you want a drink, this is the gesture for getting a drink. And it was odd to me to see that those aren't universal gestures outside of my area. So that first year in that first year in Chicano Studies, I started working on like going back in time to the Aztec people. For example, they had like walls that they would draw symbols for gestures on. For example, if they drew corn, all the rows of corn, you know how they draw little the kernels of corn. And those stacked up meant that corn was growing and counting how many. And that morphed into language use. For example, like this using a stack at medium height or short, that meant a little bit versus a lot. So those types of systems have led to how language is used. And that was what my research was on. At CLU, which is just over here in Thousand Oaks, I teach ASL. I also teach at Ventura Community College District. My goal in teaching is to educate hearing students in this language so that when those students choose their career, whether they're a doctor or a lawyer or whatever they choose, they will have some basis in this language so that when they have deaf clients, deaf consumers, deaf patients, they won't be afraid of us. They won't have that sort of visceral reaction that some people have upon meeting a deaf person because they will have already developed that foundation, have communicated, have interacted with a number of deaf people. So that's why I chose to start teaching ASL. I also teach my students about deaf culture, about how we make phone calls. For example, technology has changed a lot in terms of how we make phone calls. I have an app on my phone. so that I can call anybody I need at a moment's notice. I have one at home, one in my office, and one on my mobile so that I can get an interpreter anytime that I need so that I can make phone calls or have access. So the tools that we use have changed, and I'm sure they will continue to do so in the future. One story I wanted to tell that's a little bit funny, kind of interesting. You make the call. This is a safe space, so I want to tell you about my one experience that I had. I went to In-N-Out to get something to eat. We have a particular sign for In-N-Out, but never mind. But I was driving through. You know, they have the menu and the speaker box where you would normally order if you're a hearing person, but as a deaf person, you still have the right to go through the drive-through if you want to. Today you do, but that time it was more difficult. So what I did, I write a note, like a text on my phone. I'd ordered a double-double with cheese, French fries, and a drink. I let them know whether it's to go or to eat in. And then I pull up to the box, the speaker, where you order. And since I can't order there, I just pull up to the cashier, to the window. I do let them know that I'm deaf and that I hadn't ordered a speaker. I indicate that if the cashier just tries to speak to me, it's not going to work. I do indicate that I'm deaf, and if they know some basic sign language, all the better. But it's important that we communicate in a different way other than just speaking at me. And so this particular cashier decided to do just the opposite. They just came to the window and started speaking right at my face. And I didn't understand what they were saying. Again, I indicated that if you just keep speaking to me, this isn't going to go well. I'm deaf. If we can use another form of communication, that'd be great. If you know some basic signs, great. If we can write down things back and forth, that would be awesome. They just got louder. They started shouting. And I thought, okay, this is not going well. I asked, could you maybe call a manager to get some help? Maybe get a team over here that can help you through this interaction. And I was just watching this whole interaction with them, trying to get somebody over to the window. And finally, a manager came over and shouted, "How may I help you?" And again, I went through the whole thing from this young kid up to a manager. And like I said, I grew up in oral education. So, I might be able to get through an order like that or gesturing through it, but I get so tired of it, and so I just do this. I just nod sometimes. They weren't even trying to be accommodating at all, but I finally got my food, and it made me think about the deaf experience, and that I am just one person going through this. I grew up in the barrio and had lots of experienced lots of discrimination and oppression, and just going to the window at a fast food joint trying to get some food. This is what I think of when I think, I teach people ASL because they might be at this window at some point. And I don't want other people to have to go through this. So I just said, thank you, got my food. They gave me 4 French fries. which made me think, did they think I ordered 4 French fries? But they gave me 4 French fries, 4 drinks. And I thought, well, in some ways that worked. And they stood there saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Not even trying to gesture. They signed thank you one little bit. And I drove away thinking, what a weird experience that was. But when I got home, everybody was happy. I acted as if I had bought French fries for everybody. So, and as I said, this is not an isolated incident. Growing up, often I didn't have access to interpreters or captioning or any other ways to actually communicate. Things have vastly improved. Technology has improved. Just for one example, back in my time when I was growing up, if I wanted to call to make an appointment, I had to make sure that I was 2 or 3 weeks in advance if I needed an interpreter to get booked. But now things have changed. We have access to a system called video relay or video remote interpreting, which means an interpreter can show up on the screen at a moment's notice rather than having to wait 2 to 3 weeks to go to the doctor. So, things have improved. Laws have changed. Morals, ethics have changed. A variety of things have changed to make the playing field a little more equal for the deaf community. And that's what we needed. So my next goal is to get my PhD from UCLA in Chicano Studies. And again, I want to have an emphasis in Chicano Deaf Studies. So that's me in a nutshell. It sounds like we're going to take a break for a minute. Is there an opportunity to take a break? You mean for me? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, if we could take 5, that would be great.
All right, we are going to set up to do questions for Joel if anybody has them.
Okay, just to come back and ask if anyone has any questions. Both, actually. I'm bilingual in reading and writing English, but it's still hard for me. I have to go to Google sometimes and look for words in the dictionary to make sure I've got them right. But it's nowhere near my fluency in ASL. So sometimes my writing does look a little bit like ASL. And if I have any trouble with someone understanding me, I'll try to get on a video chat with them to make sure that I'm getting my point across. Because, you know, text and email communication is pretty much the standard now, but sometimes those can be misconstrued and misunderstood. Most deaf people have their primary language is ASL, which sometimes leads to literacy struggles depending on the level of education. So if you're talking to or interacting with a person that is deaf, it's important that there's some transparency in terms of getting to the point of what they mean rather than hopefully not judging them based on one written interaction. Good question. Other questions?
How was the experience when you were wearing that shoe? Do you recall what what was the restaurant name called?
It was the In-N-Out in Lancaster. But it's not the only one that I've had that experience at. You name the restaurant, and some miscommunication has happened, some mishap is very common, just because a lack of communication. And even though I try to clarify and I try to, make myself as clear as possible, still miscommunications happen. Every once in a while it happens where I'll go to a place, a store or a restaurant or something, and one of my former students is working there, which is ideal because I've taught them the language and they know how to interact and communicate with a deaf adult or deaf person. So that, in that instance, makes me happy. Other questions?
So we have a question from the chat. Ask, what or other resources do you deaf?
There is a book that you can order through Amazon, and there's a movie too that talks about the community of Latino deaf, and it shows how a young deaf Latino interacts with their parents, with their family, using LSM, ASL, speaking Spanish and English. I don't know a ton of books that can give you that experience in a nutshell. Sarah, she mentioned NAD, which is the National Association of the Deaf. I'm certain that they have a list of recommended books that, you know, that can give you some education about the deaf community. My goal is to write a book and get it published once I finish my PhD. And hopefully that will be an addition to the cadre of available resources out there in terms of the deaf hard of hearing experience. Good question there, Daniela. Let me see if I can find it. There's a deaf Latino organization founded in LA. Sorry, my Wi-Fi is not happy in here, so it's struggling to get connected. Here it is. Sorry, still loading. It's Hispanic Deaf Issues and Challenges in Biliteracy, or Bilingual Education, excuse me. It's a pretty old book, actually. It's from the 80s, but compared to today, there's different resources out there, but it's still a good one. And I have my own files, like on my laptop, and articles, journal articles that I have ready to go. If you want to contact me, I can share them with you. My contact information will be here, so feel free to reach out to me for those resources. Perfect. Any other questions? All right, then I am going to turn it over to Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we are with the last guest speaker. Her name is Jeannie Hallman. Sarah, quick question.
This is supposed to go till 30. Are we on a strict timeline?
Exactly 2:30. No, we have the room for longer. That's fine. We have it booked until 3, so we have some leeway time. I know a couple of us have to bounce.
Well,
I had advisors have to leave, but the president, you and Sarah can tell us your timeline.
Honestly, my presentation is not very long, so it shouldn't take much longer than that.
Sorry.
Do you want someone to push? Would you mind, Jody? Jody, you can do the slide advancement. Okay. So this is a little bit of an odd title, The Road to Tri-County GLAD. My presentation will sort of interweave with both of the other presenters. They've touched on a lot of the issues that I was going to touch on, so mine will kind of fill in the gaps. My name is Ginny Nyholm, and you can advance that slide. There we go. Who am I? Maybe you're wondering, who is this person? Well, I'm deaf, I'm blind. I grew up in a hearing family with another deaf family member who's also deaf and blind. This is my brother, and he's 2 years older than me. We have an adopted sister who is hearing. My mother and father are first-generation immigrants that moved from the Philippines. When my brother was born, my parents knew that he was deaf. Deaf-blind came a little bit later, but knew that he was deaf. Now, remember that my brother was born in the 1960s. At that time, rubella was pretty rampant, 63 to 65. But my brother was not part of the rubella group. So my parents were obviously curious about how my brother became deaf. And all we knew is that he was born deaf. People ask if mom had rubella, and she didn't. So 2 years later, my mom happened to get pregnant with me. I was born, mom was never sick, and here was a deaf baby again. So my parents, of course, at that time, as I said, the 1960s, the education model was strongly oral. ASL hadn't really been accepted as an education model or language. So my parents put us into an oral education program in Tennessee. And so we felt as if we'd lost our parents at the time. There were a lot of kids going through that system where doctors were saying, you know, doctors were telling parents that they have to make their kids speak. At that time, my dad was in the military. And my mom was a homemaker. And of course, my mom just wasn't sure what to do. She had a college degree from the Philippines, and she did her research, but was looking for the answer. You know, doctors kept telling her oral education is the best, but she saw in us that, you know, we weren't really communicating at the time. We were lost kids at the time. So like I said, they put us into an oral education program, which was not successful. My uncle on my mom's side was also doing some research and really couldn't find any resources. This would have been in 1969. When ASL, it hadn't really been recognized yet. It wasn't emerging. But my parents were still struggling, as were other parents of deaf and hard of hearing children at the time. So over time, my parents decided to move from Tennessee to California. We didn't have any family in Tennessee or anything, so moving to California, where we had tons of relatives, was the better option. And they had researched education for deaf children, oral programs, and found Loma Vista Elementary School. In the 70s, it was still an oral program, and signing was forbidden. But my parents put us there, and again, we little lost children. We were navigating that system of oral education, and it was not working for us. But we had one teacher that recommended another school that had a system called total communication. But she did so on the fly. She didn't want anybody else to know that, hey, over there, they're doing sign language. And my parents were immediately interested. At that time, I was 6 and my brother would have been 8. So they decided to try my brother out first and put him in that school. And he started signing like crazy right away, started hanging out, talking to other deaf kids. And at that time, like Joel said, they were using signing exact English. But my brother, his language development, his language acquisition took off. He started hanging around with other kids. And my mom even set up like a parent group, like a play group. This was when most of the moms in that group were going to night classes to take sign language. So while my brother was at that school, I was watching, seeing how things were going. And my brother came home one day. I was home from Loma Vista, and my brother was at the other school, and he came in, was all excited. And he started signing to me. I thought my brother was an alien. Remember, I felt completely lost at the time and I didn't know how to sign, but my brother started signing. He started writing my name, Jenny. We had encyclopedias at our house and he'd pick one out. He picked S. Remember, my brother was 8, but he thumbed through this book and he found the encyclopedia entrance for sign language. And it showed some examples of like alphabet. So he started teaching me the alphabet at 6 years old on repeat until I finally got it. I didn't know what he had been trying to teach me, but he started finger spelling his name. He'd say, I'm Mike. And then he'd show me how to finger spell my name, Ginny. And then I finally knew my name. I knew how to finger spell my name. And I remember that moment in that room. My mom was cooking and she was kind of wondering what was going on with us. And she saw my brother signing. And she said, and us interacting. And she said, that's it. Both of these children are going to that school. And both of us, after that, our language acquisition just absolutely took off. And I don't want to go too in depth about my language background or my journey through elementary school, but I did go to Loma Vista, then Balboa Middle School, and then I graduated from Rio Mesa High School. And then I went to the Rio Mesa didn't go so well for me, so I went to Riverside, California Deaf School in Riverside. And fast forward several years, college, I have a BA degree in deaf studies with an emphasis in human services, a lot like Sarah. And a lot of experience, like Sarah mentioned. I have a master's in community counseling. And just going back to my BA, it is from CSUN. I forgot to mention that. And then my master's degree is from Gallaudet University, which again is in Washington, DC. So that's kind of, that's where I met my future husband as well. So all of that experience happened over, 30, 40 years. And that is, all of those experiences are part of my tool belt that I bring to work. I've worked with a deaf agency in mental health field, also done social services, advocacy work, and a variety of other things that I've done throughout my journey. I identify as a deaf person, and always have, but over the years, I've honed that a little bit more to identify as a deaf-blind person. And often people think like, Jenny looks like she can see fine. I can see like everyone in this room right now, but I do have retinitis pigmentosa. So that's why I identify as deaf and blind. But I have made it through, even though there have been some ups and downs, sometimes when I felt lost, sometimes when I needed family support, sometimes, just beginning to identify myself as a deaf-blind person has changed my career path, even just navigating the school systems, and to get to a point where I've now become the regional director of Tri-County GLAAD. And sometimes I look around and think, well, how did I get here? But I have pivoted all of my focus into that role for right now. Just in a nutshell, Sarah already explained some of Tri-County GLAAD's what we do. And like Sarah said, it changed her life as it's changed many. We are a subsidiary of the Greater Los Angeles Agency on Deafness, who serves deaf, hard of hearing, deaf blind, deaf plus other disabilities in the 3 counties, Ventura, San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara. Just to give you a couple of more statistics, you've already seen some today, but if we just concentrate on Ventura County, there are about 834,000 people living in the county. That's hearing deaf, every single person in the population. Now, if we take a percentage of those people that have a hearing loss, it's about 72,000 people that are deaf, hard of hearing, and people with any kind of hearing loss. When we say any kind of hearing loss, that typically includes people that don't identify with the deaf community, which is fine. They are more comfortable speaking, they have access to some sound. That would include about 70% of senior citizens, that people above 60 years old that have lost some of their hearing. Hearing loss is actually the 3rd leading disability in the US. Like I said before, I am the regional director of Tri-County GLAAD, and we provide a variety of services, some of which are community assistance, or communication assistance. For example, if a deaf consumer comes in and remember their first language, their native language is ASL, and they might not be exactly bilingual in English. So they can bring in documents, letters, and our staff will sign whatever those documents say so that they can understand them clearly. We also do some phone interpreting, peer counseling. We're not therapists, I should just add that caveat, but we can refer people out to therapists in Ventura County. Ventura County Behavioral Health, we have resources with them, and they are able to provide counseling services. We do a broad range of advocacy services, whether you need help with the legal field of navigating ADA, and a whole host of other services that we call advocacy. We also do independent living skills, where if a consumer comes in and maybe they need help with writing a letter or responding to a letter, or if they're dealing with some kind of technology, even like a new iPhone that they're just having trouble with, and we have staff that can sit with them, give them some training so that they can learn to navigate that on their own the next time. So that's some of our independent living skills that we do. We also do employment assistance, primarily Primarily, we provide resources where our consumers can look for a job. We do mock interviews with them. We talk about how they should dress for an interview. So that's how we do employment assistance. And then also if we need to get more in depth with employment assistance, we can refer them to the Department of Rehab, which is one of the organizations that we collaborate with. We also provide information and referral services on a whole variety of organizations. For example, where people can take ASL classes, where they can find hearing aids, and the list goes on and on from there, and we can provide them those resources. So those are all of the services that TC GLAD provides. Next. Now, some of you might think, well, I know a deaf person that could benefit from some of these services, and that doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with this college campus, but for any reason, you can contact us, whether through phone, email, or online. And you also can follow us on all the socials. We have Instagram, YouTube. I need to change that one now. That Twitter has become an X, hasn't it? I haven't quite gotten used to it, and I actually like the Twitter logo. I don't know. It feels like some exotic reason I have to put an X on there now. But you can follow us on all those socials. And next. Now, if you want to know more about TC GLAD, you can go here. This is our website, and you can also use the QR code. And I have a long list of stories, but I'm going to pull one out of my story bag to tell you. Our staff at TC GLAD, I was talking with one of them. We had a hearing mom in that wanted help with an IEP for their child. So we thought, okay, we'll go and help them. And we do this sometimes for some reason. People need help with IEPs. This happened like 3 weeks ago, where the principal at this school completely forgot that I was supposed to be in the meeting. Emails were going around, and the principal admitted that, well, I forgot to hire a sign language interpreter. And I thought, well, you forgot me. Okay. So how about captioning? Can we find somebody that can do captioning? Because this was on Zoom. But the principal was like, I don't know how, I don't know where, I don't know what. And I find that a little hard to believe after 3 years of COVID that you can't find the closed captioning button. But that was the case. And so I got into the Zoom room, and I was sitting there with the hearing mother of a deaf child, and everybody else in the IEP was there. The people that were representing that district. And the principal seemed just discombobulated, and they were all over the place and just kept going, hey, wait a minute, just a second, I'm going to get there. So I'm waiting. The principal seemed flustered, but I'm waiting, patient, waiting for things to start. Things are still looking a little bit, they actually had to shut down the Zoom room and come back. We're going to come back in about 10 minutes. So I waited. And once we got back, they were still trying to set up the captioning. Well, there was a person that was, the deaf or hard of hearing speaker that was signing. They were supposed to be signing, but they instead decided to speak, which made me feel left out because, one, that was my only way of communicating with anybody in this meeting. And then they decided to just speak. So I was completely left out. So I was in the chat box. Saying, well, obviously you can't figure out how to make this Zoom meeting happen appropriately. So I am going to sign out. And the principal looked at me and they were obviously having a hard time. They said, I'm sorry. But I decided to leave the room. And then a half an hour later, people started emailing me and texting me, especially the mother, saying, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry. And it stuck in my mind that these people don't need to be sorry. The principal was the one who should have set up services. And it should have been done way before the day of this meeting. So that's just one story that comes to mind when I talk about accommodations and how to serve the deaf and hard of hearing population in a whole variety of ways. There are different ways to accommodate this population, but accommodations do have to be made. So I'm going to wrap up there unless you have any questions. Oh, that's a good question. Thank you for clarifying that, actually. My brother and I both have pigmentitis, retinitis pigmentosa. We were diagnosed when I was 11 and my brother was 13. We had been signing since like 6 and 8 years old. We got diagnosed because my mother saw us often playing, and then we would fall or knock things over that were in our peripheral vision. So she decided to take both of us to the doctor to see what was going on. And they referred us to UCLA for more in-depth study and found, and then did diagnose us with RP at, again, my brother was 13 and I was 11. So that's how that happened. Oh, and in terms of Braille, my brother did take Braille at the Helen Keller Institute in New York. I think that was just before COVID, though. So a few years ago, probably 4 years ago. And I've never learned Braille myself. And in fact, I have some resistance to it. I'm not ready to go that route yet. I still kind of tread both the lines between deaf world and blind world, if you will. So I'm kind of still on the fence myself. But I know when the time comes, I will. Thank you for asking that. Other questions? Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. I don't travel particularly often myself, but when I do, I honestly haven't had a problem with the airlines, with accommodating through the airlines. They do a beautiful job typically. I have had the experience where they bring a wheelchair for me. But maybe, but Joel, have you had that experience where it seems like it's common where they bring a wheelchair for people that are deaf for some reason? I bought my ticket for a flight online and asked for accommodations, I'm sorry about that. Let me place myself better. Good, okay. So I was online ordering my ticket. They asked if accommodations were required. So I put deaf I'm deaf, thinking that there would be some kind of communication access, accommodation, or some kind of service for if there were announcements on board that they would make those accessible to me, or some kind of, like a transcript or someone to write things down. That was what I had in mind. But I got to the airport, got to the front desk with my bag, was dropping my bags off to have them checked. And they did have a wheelchair there for me. And I thought, oh, this is for someone else. I didn't assume that it was for me. And they gestured that I should get into the wheelchair. And I thought, surely that wheelchair is there for someone else, not me. But there was no one else around. And I pointed to myself thinking, oh, this wheelchair is here for me. And they gestured that I should get into it. And I said, no, I don't need a wheelchair. I wanted accommodations for communication. But they really didn't have anything else in their bag. Like, they made me get into this chair, took me to the elevator, took me to the gate, through security and everything in a wheelchair, and got me to the gate. And then they let me go. And I also got to be the first in line to get on the airplane, which I look like a VIP, honestly. So it was a little bit mind-blowing that was the accommodation. And it made me realize, that was one of the first times I traveled. So it's not like it happens every time. I'm really a good traveler now, but it was an interesting experience. I've learned how to ask for a different type of a different type of accommodation now. So things have changed a bit. I know that we have to wrap up here pretty soon, but I do love traveling. And I love flying with Delta. They're great. They provide captions on the movies, and I've never had a problem with Delta. They're really great. I go Delta everywhere. And Joel was saying, I thought the same thing. I've had good experiences with them too. And Ginny is saying, I honestly haven't had any horror stories in traveling, and it's challenging when you're deafblind. One thing is that at the ticket counter, I usually let them know that I am deaf and blind, and they put something in the system that alerts the gate that I'm deaf and blind as well. So the staff usually brings us up front and gets us onto the plane first, even when we're first class. So it's always a little bit nerve-wracking to see people looking at us wondering why we're first in line. But it's nice to be able to get onto the plane first and sit in your seat. But honestly, you think I might have, but I haven't had any horror stories. So I guess I've been lucky. Okay, any other questions?
Every now and then I see people, they're outside, like to communicate with here, take what you want. My question is, has anybody gotten pulled over? And what's that interaction like? Do they just let you go or write the ticket already? You gotta take this fine.
Does anyone want to go first? This is Ginny. I don't drive, but my husband's a smart guy. When he gets pulled over, it's happened a couple of times where it's an ambulance and he has to pull over to the side of the road, or he's gotten pulled over by the police. And police are often pretty good at gesturing. They'll gesture through saying, you were going too fast, slow down. So my husband is a law-abiding citizen, so sometimes he just takes a ticket. But honestly, most of the time, my husband, if he's driving and I'm in the passenger seat, I'm just, being a passenger, my husband will alert me that I'm about to get pulled over. And I'm like, how do you know? And he said that he could see cars in front of him getting pulled over as well. So with my vision, I can't see peripherally or anything. So if I were in his shoes, I wouldn't even know I was getting pulled over, most likely. So that's one deaf experience with getting pulled over. Joel is saying, I just got pulled over back in August. I was in the Valley in Chatsworth. The sign for that looks like chat and worth, if that makes any sense. But I was with my family. My kids are here actually, and one of my children was with me. We were driving at night. It was probably 10 o'clock, and there weren't too many people on the road. But I did see the lights of a police officer behind me. Sorry, I came to a light, and it was turning yellow, and nobody around or anything. So I went through, but it wasn't red yet. I had looked at the intersection. I looked in all of my mirrors just to see what was around before going through this intersection, because I'm always careful. So I looked at everything, and then it was a two-way street. I was going through a light, and there was an arrow where you could turn left. And I saw the arrow as I was going through. That arrow was red, but I had a green light to go straight. So again, I looked around, I was clear, and I turned on my signal so that I could go straight rather than being in the turn lane, because I decided to go straight. When I did, I saw LAPD run up behind me, lights blazing. And so I was like, okay, I pulled over. And the police officer came up to my window, and right away, of course, I let them know that that I'm deaf. I use sign language to communicate. If you have an interpreter available, please call them so that we can communicate clearly, or please write things down, but don't try to just speak to me. And of course, again, they started speaking to me. So I had to stop them and say, please, officer, could you please write things down? I'm happy to communicate with you. I am complying. I just want to be able to make sure I have accommodations that I'm communicated with. And this officer was nice, but did keep speaking. My son was in the car. My children were in the car. They're 11 and 2. I noticed that the officer started speaking to my son rather than to me. And I right away had to stop that and tell the officers to please speak to me. I'm the adult here. Don't rely on my son to speak to you. And so instead, they wrote down that I had gone through a red light. And I knew I hadn't. And it made me think that often hearing people rely on sound, whereas deaf people rely on their vision. So they're much more visually acute than a hearing person is typically. So this police officer telling me that I had gone through a red light, I told him maybe that was from your perspective, but if you look at the camera, which I'm sure you have in your car, please go look at that, because I didn't go through a red light. And because they didn't want to do that, they said, no, it's okay, have a good night, and let me go. But I did want to appreciate them trying to communicate with me. And in the end, I didn't get a ticket, but that was my experience. Any other? Okay.
Can we get a picture of, we do that at the end, but yeah.
Yeah, just wrapping up, you might notice that I have brought these with me from TC Glad. These are our brochures, business cards, some flyers for deaf and hard of hearing events that are available to you if you'd like to join. So I can either leave these here, or I can give them to your organization and you can pass them out as you see fit. I'll just leave this here, but I think that's it for now. And Joel's saying, would you mind if I pass along my contact information so that your organization can have it? I'll write it on the whiteboard so that you can pass it along if you need to.
All right. First off, I want to say that was amazing. That was honestly a very enriching experience. So there's a huge thanks to all of our guest speakers that came. And in order to extend that thank you a little bit further, we actually have a little bit of a thank you gift for all of the people who did attend. For our guest speakers, at least.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
And then again, we do have those brochures that were mentioned earlier. If you would like to grab one, please come up here and grab one. So in addition to our guest speakers, really quickly, just to wrap up here, really quickly, we're gonna pull up the PowerPoint again and we're just gonna wrap up real quick. All right, so really quickly, last time we did go over we did have an anonymous survey that we did have some people fill out. Really quickly, if you have filled out the survey in the past, please don't fill it out again. But if you haven't, please feel free to either type that link that's currently on your screen into your browser or scan that QR code with your phone. And it's going to take you to a Google Forms link and then just answer a couple questions. And I think with that, we are going to wrap up here today. So if there were any last minute questions about anything, either about something for our guest speakers, please go ahead and type those in the chat. But is there anything else? But I think with that, we're going to conclude this second general meeting. Thank you everyone for attending.
All right, I'm going to log everyone out. Thank you.